Check.
Are they on? They're on. All right, excellent. So, 8:30 on the dot. We are going to be respectful of people's time. I'm excited because this is my first workshop to preside over.
Yes.
So my understanding about the rules of the workshop are, we are here today to have staff educate us about this situation further. Mr. Franklin in the last council meeting stated that there was a need, but he wanted more workshops to be able to discuss potential outside the box thinking. So we called this workshop here today to discuss outside the box thinking and allow all the council members to have a voice in what should happen going forward. So be warned, when I wrap this up, I'm going to go around and talk to each of you and say, is there anything left on the table that you want to talk about? So that we all have an opportunity to say what we think. Citizens, if there's anybody out there just begging to talk, my suggestion is get in touch with your council member before the next council meeting, and they will be your voice at the next council meeting. So this is going to be an opportunity for staff to educate council to ask questions. We're going to try to keep it limited to that. There's not an end time on this, but I'll tell you, I told two judges I couldn't be in front of them this morning so I could be here, but I couldn't do that this afternoon. So we're going to try to keep this 8:30 to 10:30-ish. If we end early, great. If we need to go a little bit longer, let's have some good reason for that. I think I covered everything. With that, I'd like to turn it over to David. David's going to make a short presentation, then we're going to open it up for issues.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank everybody for being here this morning. So always enjoy the conversation to talk about this subject because, as I mentioned in the first work session, I do believe this is the most pressing issue facing our community. I think that public safety and the public safety is paramount. So while I enjoy the growth and the development of what we're seeing in the community, it is important, if not vital, to address this very issue. How we get to that point, I believe we presented that information. I'm not going to go back over the entire PowerPoint deck that I provided the last time. I'll be more than happy. I have it queued up for discussion, but I've covered this material quite a bit over the last 3 or 4 years, and so I'd be more than happy to answer any of those questions. But I did, at the council meeting, there was a few points that were brought up or questions that were asked that we'll provide again publicly and even through this presentation of what the costs were, total number of blackouts, things of that nature. Jen, we actually have queued up a piece to kind of break down the property tax. There was a question about that, of like how that's broken down. So I've actually got that kind of queued up just to kind of demonstrate, because it's confusing. Property tax levies are very confusing just breaking them down. So what I've got, and there's a little bit of information that we did not add at the last meeting that I thought was very helpful, and it's this first slide that talks about, you'll see the total number of square miles we cover. I think this is interesting because when I brought up when the city of Republic consolidated with Brookline, we doubled the geographic area of the community. So you'll see that when we're talking about our total number of officers, if we were to break that down into the total officers per square mile, you would see that ratio is substantially different. But for this case, we just did it, how many officers per 1,000 residents. But you'll see that we're actually double even Ozark and almost 3 times as high as Nixa for what our officers actually have to cover in total square miles of the city. So when we're looking at how many people, but again, when you're evaluating how many officers you need on the street, the standard that you use is roughly 2 officers per 1,000 residents. But the square miles I thought was a very telling feature because it talks about where we have to patrol and where we have to go for the citizens. This is the next slide that we've added because the question was asked, where can we cut in the general fund? I've been asked this question outside the council meeting from people that have contacted me with additional questions. This breaks down the general fund budget. So when people are like, why don't you take from here, you're looking at building a public works building. Why are you building a public works building when you need to add additional police and fire? The public works building comes out of the water and sewer rates. It does not come out of the general use. So, and we're not allowed in the water and sewer fund. There's a thing called, we call it pilot, or it's called pilot, payment in lieu of taxes. So state statute limits the amount of money you can pull out of water and sewer funds to 5%. So really the only place, and again, we have a parks tax that funds parks, street department. So you cannot pull from those other funds to address the general fund. So this is the breakdown of what the total general fund consists of. And you can see that the police and fire make up almost already at this time over 50%. It's actually about 52% of the overall general fund. So to generate the funding in the general fund to address the public safety would have to come from either administration, the builds department, the IT department, utility billing. All of that is outlined, HR, on that slide. So the municipal court, all that that's a breakdown of where the general use that we currently have funds 13 different department and divisions in the general fund. So if you're looking at where you would have to cut to insert money into those funds, it would have to come from the only place that it could come from is those departments. So it's not going to come from cutting back on the public works department or water and sewer. It will not come from cutting the parks budget or anything else like that nature. So I just wanted to be clear and just bring clarity to that particular piece of information. And I want to thank the finance department for pulling that information together, because I thought that was very helpful to see kind of how that breaks down, because there's a lot of questions about, well, what would we cut? What could we cut to do that? And as I stated at the council meeting and in my other slide, you'd literally have to eliminate every single one of those departments on the right to address the police and fire on the left. This is just kind of a breakdown of the housing. We do not have the census data, so the census data will not arrive until the fall. So we've been communicated with it's likely September, October of 2020 or 2021 that we'll receive that information. But this is kind of a trend of what we're seeing on the single-family homes and population growth. So as you'll see, Republic is growing in this deck. And so we're anticipating, I believe that's an additional 550 single-family residential units and then an additional 600 in 2022. Again, if I was to go back to the slide deck that shows our property tax and feel like, well, all this new housing and all this new growth, it ought to be generating a lot of residential property tax that goes into the general fund that would help pay for police and fire, but that only grows at $50,000 a year. So basically the Hancock Amendment limits the amount of growth. So even though we see that slide moving in that area, that trajectory, it does not equate that property taxes moving at that same degree. So just a little bit of and this is the population growth, I believe. Yes. So this is what the population growth would look like over the next 2 years as we continue to work through these are projections based upon the housing. If you apply a multiplier to the total number of residential units and add that to our overall population. So I will say this about the census data. About the time we receive that, and probably 12 to 18 months after it, I'll almost suggest to you that that'll almost be a useless document when it comes to our overall population. In fact, I'd almost encourage the city. I did this when I was in Northwest Arkansas, having this type of growth and experiencing the same situation. We actually paid for an additional or a new census about 4 years after the census was complete. So communities have the right to do that. You can actually pay for an additional census because you get funding in some form or fashion based upon the size of your growth, the size of your population. So cities that are operating and moving at this trend, that is not uncommon, and it's something that I would strongly encourage us to do at some point. This is the sales tax, Chapter 144. General Missouri taxes are all retail sales. We talk about what is taxable, what items are charged with sales tax in the City of Republic. I'm asked this question: how will it affect people with their medication? How will it affect people with their grocery, or how will it affect the lowest income of the community? Food sales tax in Missouri is not taxed at the same rate as say you're going to Lowe's and purchasing lumber. There's two different tax rates when you're dealing with food and medicine versus, now granted, over-the-counter medicine, Tylenol, it's going to be taxed at the same tax rate as you're buying a 2x4. So it kind of talks about just what all is included, or what you can, or what is the difference of what our tax rates are in the state of Missouri. So basically, most likely the most impacted would be on food, but again, that is limited by Missouri state statute. This is a property tax valuation. So this is the question that's asked, and I'm just kind of created a very simple slide. And this is actually a person I know, mine. So this is the residential market. So when the accounting appraised value, they appraise it. If you look at your tax statement, it'll give you an appraised value of your property. How they assess that is different for agriculture. For residential, and also for commercial. So on a residential assessed, they'll derive that by multiplying. How you get your assessed value is you multiply your appraised value by 19%. On commercial, that's appraised at 32%. But for the sake of this discussion, so you multiply that by 19% and you get an assessed value. So they take that they divide that number by 100 to give you what your assessed value is per 100 valuation. So basically you just divide that by 100 and you get, in that situation, 456. So then you would multiply that by the levy. So basically I took the fire district levy out of NICSA, which was 73 cents. You multiply that. That's how you would know what the resident would be paying if we were to do a property tax increase of 73 cents. It would roughly be $332 on the same valuation. Obviously, you're going to have houses that are more expensive, then you're going to have some that are less expensive. So that would tell you when asking about what would a property tax levy, if we were to go a property tax approach, that's what you'd be looking at, and that's how we would assess it. So if we were to take that, you would divide that number, I believe, by 75 cents, and that would tell you how much you actually have to generate in sales tax to make $332 per household. So I know it's a lot of confusing numbers, but really that's the most simple breakdown that I can do for someone that's like, well, I don't understand my assessed value versus my appraised value. The assessed value is what they have to break it down to, and then they multiply that. So if you're looking at your tax levy, the school district has, I believe it's 4.5% or 4.5, somewhere in that ballpark. You just multiply those numbers divided by that, and it'll give you what it should. If you're looking at your tax breakdown, this is pretty much what it should look like. Just it breaks it down in each category. The question about the city's debt. So I've been asked the question. The challenge is the city is in debt. If the city would expire their debt, then that would help pay for the police and fire. It's important to understand that the city only has debt on that one slide that I provided, and I've also got it right here in front of you. Back to this piece of paper that breaks down the city's where we pay for our debt structure. The only debt that the city has on the general fund is Fire Station 1 and 2. So again, having no funding source in public safety, the city used what would pay for police and fire, but only to build buildings. So essentially, if you're looking at the total debt service annually for Fire Station 1 and 2 is $168,000 or 2%. That's not a material change in the overall budget. So the debt that we have in other places do not impact police and fire. So if we paid off all the water and sewer debt, and even if we paid off Fire Station 1 and 2, you would see that it would add an additional $168,000. That's roughly, probably 3.5 employees on the public safety side. So materially speaking, that debt service is not impacting the situation. It only represents 2% of our overall general fund budget. So just to clarify that position, it's not the parks debt. We got the debt on this building. We have the debt on the aquatic center, both which are about to expire. Then we have debt on water and sewer in Brookline. And really, other than that, we got a fire truck that's funded by a 1/8 cent sales tax, but you'll see it's only about 2%. So that is not a material change in the overall way things are handled. This is just the area municipality sales tax rates. What I have in front of you, I'm asked this question a lot, and I've actually brought for an example a comparison receipt between Ozark and Republic, buying the same thing at Lowe's in Ozark. So the question is, no, that's not, our tax rates are not, it's not impacted. You will see that if you buy the same thing at Ozark Lowe's, it is actually at 9.375 for the same material. So just comparing that those taxing districts in other areas, so when you're looking at our taxing district and suggesting that it's the highest in the area, this receipt actually demonstrates that it's not. So even with our new tax rate that we're proposing, it would still be lower than what you would be purchasing the same material in Ozark for. And I apologize to the city of Ozark. I'm not trying to exploit them. I'm just trying to demonstrate when the question is brought up, we'll be the highest in the area. It really is not an accurate statement, because this reflects in this piece right here that, and even this slide, that those taxing districts are substantially, or not substantially, they are different, and when we're done, it will be a comparable rate. Cost of an election. So basically in April of 2017, we paid $6,500. August of 2017, we paid $17,000. You can see in April, it was about $6,160. April of 2019 was 10,500, and April of 2020 was 17,541. April of 21 was estimated expenses 14,222. This is the interesting information that we get from the county. Is it could be anywhere from 18,000 to 76,000 depending on how many people actually get on the August ballot. So not knowing who all is going to be on that, we don't actually have exactly what the expense would be. The two pieces that I'd bring up in the expense of the overall to the city is we don't have an April 2022 or an April 23 election because we changed the charter. So we have no municipal elections in the city after this April because we changed the charter to every 4-year terms. So the city's not going to have those expenses in 2022 or 2023. Now the parks ballot will have one, but that'll be assessed to the parks budget and also out of the parks, their cash account. So it's not coming out of the general fund to take care of either one of those. And that's really the additional information that based upon what I heard at the last council meeting, that was in addition to. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions, but really at that stage, I'm here to answer questions or help participate in a solution. So,
well, what I would suggest is if any council members have any questions about what was just presented, we talk about that. And then we'll turn it over to Mr. Franklin. We'll go through your ideas.
Sure.
And so does any council member have a question about what Mr. Cameron just presented? All right, go.
Mr. Cameron, first of all, you do a terrific job going through all of this. I mean, you've probably got one of the hardest jobs of anyone I know. So this is a difficult situation. There's a lot of different areas of everything, and so it's very complicated. I'm very proud of the staff, all the hard work that Republic has done. This has been overwhelming for me, and so I can imagine what you go through when you have to deal with this every single day. So thank you, and thank you for this opportunity today. Very much appreciated. My first question had to do with the census data. I was just curious with the census data, what kind of a change could we see in our funding formula from those new numbers?
Okay, so to clarify the census data affects us on two factors. The LEST, which is a law enforcement sales tax, which is a county issue. Then you also have one that's a parks issue. So basically what we would see might be a slight, well, we're going to see an increase, especially on the park side. You'll see some on the police side, but really the census data only gives us, it's only a county share of what the county is going to distribute to us in those two funds. We don't get it in any other subsidy. We might see it on the street side, but there's nothing in the general fund that actually applies other than the county LEST tax, law enforcement sales tax.
Is it the law enforcement sales tax, is that what gives us our funding through the Missouri gas tax?
No.
No. So would that be, are those some formulas too that would change that give us any additional funding?
In the street budget.
In the street budget.
Yeah.
So there would be some additional funding from possibly the state level and the federal level that has to do with that census data as well.
Yes. I mean, there would be some that would, materially change it, no, but it will, it's not going to hurt.
Right. Some effect, but not significant is.
Correct. And it's also important to remember that the challenge with the motor fuel sales tax is it's actually part of the overall solution is to get it out of the police budget. So any improvement in there would not necessarily be beneficial to the police department because that money needs to get back in the street budget. So any improvement there would be huge just for as we begin to hopefully transition that money back into the street budget.
And then before I forget, if there was any way I can get a print off of this for all your slides today too, I would appreciate it. Those are some good slides, and so I'd like to have those for reference later as well.
I thought the square miles, I did not have, for the whole community and everybody, that was a very telling, I did not realize it was that big.
It is, and it's a lot of very valuable information as I look into these other neighboring communities and some of their issues as well, and try to get an understanding regionally of what's going on. It's not easy information to put together, and so I appreciate the staff taking the time to put this together for us.
You're welcome.
David, is this something when we get emails from citizens that we can email?
Yes, it's on our city website as well.
Okay, or just directly to that?
Yeah, more than
Are these slides on the?
no. We
These
did.
are the new. That,
Yeah,
okay.
we're not. We want to be very cautious that nothing goes out that you've not seen first.
Sure. No, I appreciate that.
Do you have a turnover rate for the police and fire?
Yes. So basically, well, that's a great question. I actually looked at the data. Lisa, I'm sorry we don't have it with us. We can bring it, but since in 2021, I'm sorry, we're in 21. In the last 12 months, we've lost 12 employees in police and fire. So basically, they have I think it's about 25% turnover. Does that sound right?
I think over the last 3 years, it's about 25%. Last year in 2020, it was about 33%, if I'm remembering.
That's correct. But what I would suggest in that, and like I was suggesting in the meeting, you're going to have some that I want to be really respectful of the statement. But you're going to have some that's just good turnover. You know, it's like you're going to have some that's just natural attrition. But the other pieces of that, 33%, I'd say you could take if you had 12. If you was to take 4 of those, then you're going to say, okay, that's natural attrition.
I assume you can't probably divulge exit interviews, but is there?
Money. Well, you're going to have. Culture is one. It's always there's going to be a couple of factors, but I think since the last data, the majority of it is going to be going to Greene County or other agencies. But it's just we do not compete from a retirement perspective or a starting pay perspective, and so both of those, some went to the private sector, some of them came back. So a lot of it's going to be driven by pay. The second was going to be this. The other thing about it is law enforcement in itself, in the last 12 months, 18 months. It's just not. I mean, right or wrong. Think about it. If you're out there and you're seeing all the negative related to it, it's like the identity of a law enforcement officer. It's getting challenged a lot, and so it's kind of hard to go do that job when you're trying to protect and serve, but you're being watched so closely. Like it's like waiting for anything to go wrong. That's a difficult job, and so some of that may just be getting completely out of law enforcement. And I don't recall, but I recall one of those being to that state. Just I'm getting completely out, but then they came back to work for the city.
And one thing I've found too, it's interesting to look in at, my concentration is on Republic, but as well as understanding of what's going on around us. I'm looking at these other communities and staffing, pay, retirement, that's an issue for them as well. There's a larger community that's one of our neighbors that they had an interesting council debate, and they were actually, according to several of the candidates and incumbents, a number of police officers short, and competitive pay was also a priority of many of them. And so part of my concern, as well as looking into this, is finding the funding, is the fact that our neighbors see this as a concern as well, and they're already looking to raise theirs. So it's definitely a badminton game, I would say, between a lot of our communities to find the best law enforcement and first responders that we can get.
Excellent. And so I love that point. And so why I believe it only lends itself to this approach is because as our community grows, so will the amount of money that's there. It allows us to remain competitive versus right now. It's like last year we actually cut 2 positions just to even get back to the bottom. So we remove positions to increase that. We have no competitive advantage to even continue to do it with our growth. So even if we grew at, say, 10%, say we grow at 10% next year, at least we have, and it's designated to public safety, you guarantee that you can at least say to the public safety officials, we're going to continue to move up with the growth of our community, take the money that we're collecting. But when you have nothing like that, it's all distributed amongst all those other departments. We're cutting position. I mean, it's just, that's why having something else in place that grows with the growth of the community to ensure that we have a competitive, because they're looking for how they're going to fund that. Mm-hmm. They're the same way. They're like, we're not sure how to deal with it. This is the way for us because it's designated with our growth and development of the city, especially if you look at those trends. I believe it'll provide us the opportunity that we stay extremely competitive.
We're definitely the more attractive community and have a lot more here to offer than most of those communities.
I believe so. But our retirement is definitely a delta in that. I think it's
and I agree
for all of our employees.
Those were the questions I had pretty much come for these slides. I had additional questions.
Perfectly. Does anyone else have any questions about the slides or the follow-up conversation? And if not, we'll move into Mr. Franklin's questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I know, David, when you came here to Republic in July of 2016, I've just did a lot of reflection here these last few weeks, as well as concentration and thinking. I was trying to think of, what brought me here to this position. And one of the things that brought me here to this position was the fact that our city did have some excitement going on, and it wasn't kind of what I had known government to be for so long living here. And so part of the reason I'm here today is because you're here. And so in my questioning, I'm doing my best to come to the best understanding that I can. I feel a little bit differently, and I feel a little bit better about the tax. I've had some great conversations this last few weeks with some of our representatives, a lot of different citizens, and even people that aren't citizens of Republic that have given me input and kind of some support on what they have done in similar situations. But is there anything that when you came here to Republic that you did for that first budget year and I know that's probably a nightmare, but is there anything that you would do now kind of in a similar situation to like a COVID protocol that would help us in a short term free up some funding for anything else? And I know we keep asking you this question, is there anywhere you can cut? Is there anywhere you can cut? And so I don't mean to keep beating the bush, but thinking back to, the history of Republic, where we were at, where we started, where we're at now, is there anything you would do now that you did then to help with that funding situation?
So I'm going to first say thank you for your comments. Eric, I mean this with all my heart. I'm passionate about the outcome. I'm passionate about the city, about what it is. I know you are as well, so I don't take it personal. It's our job. I mean, good debate is healthy.
Absolutely.
I wish the world would do more of it versus I just can't do it. I have to do it in this environment, this arena.
Absolutely.
And so I appreciate the comments because this is where it has to take place, and it's the place where I enjoy it the most. But to answer the question, the first 6 months of my tenure with the city were probably the most nightmarish I've ever had, because you get to come in and you realize really what's going on. And you're like, I've not minced words when I told you that I looked at it and I called my spouse. I'll share this publicly. I said, listen, I'm not sure how the city's going to afford to complete the contract that they've signed with me to even fund an administrator. That's when I saw the financials in their true form, it was like they are not at the capacity to they couldn't build City Hall. They were not going to do OTC. So the very first things that I had to do was absolutely slash and burn. Then we refinanced the debt. So basically it was find cash anywhere you can. And I am not disparaging the previous leadership. They did what they had to do to lead the city. But my experience and my background was, and even in that in public finance and looking at those things, was like, you got to restrict your cash accounts what the voters said it was voted for. Once we brought in BKD and an outside auditor to straighten out the city's books, that's when we realized that there was only one avenue that we could do, was not necessarily cutting costs, because the first cost that I would have said to cut would have been my position. I was like, listen, you could save $105,000 right off the start because you could cut that to balance out your budget. The charter requires an administrator. You could change the charter to address that, but that was the first thing was, so we began to, like my administrative assistant, we reclassified the position, so it's like, could I have it? Jared, we took Jared's position, classified it to say, hey, listen, can you help share the load? So he's parks director / assistant administrator. So a lot of things we did that's not traditional in other cities. When people look at my structure, they're going to say, well, you got all these job titles. They're slash. They're all multiple dimension. That sounds poor English right there. Anyway, so what we had to do, my first budget in October, and me and Jared, I don't know, that I've been here 90 days, and it was like, we are in trouble. The city's in trouble. And how do we get them out of it? So it's fight or flight. So we basically dug in and say, listen, let's cut everything that we can. Let's look at refinancing. We restructured some things, but then we had to move the remaining money out of the street budget. The most difficult decision I had to make to balance the city's budget to get it to the $2,000 was to move the last piece, the motor fuel sales tax, out of the street budget, leaving them about $150,000 a year to balance the general fund, because by state statute we cannot do it. The only other way to have done it would have been to cut other positions in the police department, and I already came in and see. So one of the things that what I also did, Eric, was I looked at the city's staffing, and I was perplexed because I'm like, you're missing battalion chiefs. You don't have captains in the police department. And and just historically what I've seen in my career, it's like, well, what's your chain of command? I mean, when you're responding to these things, who does it? And so I saw a deficit in the total staffing on the general fund, and I figured out real quickly what it was. There was no fire department funding to overall. So to answer the question, would I do those things now? I believe I cut everything that we could at that time to just right the ship, to keep us in compliance and keep us out of a really challenging situation with not only that, but the people that we own money to. So someone that we had borrowed money from, looking at those things, it was a real challenge to refinance the debt because we had to go through Standards and Poor's and to get our bond rating to that point. So there was a lot of challenges in those first 6 months just to right the ship. If I was to tell you one of our greatest accomplishments in that stage was to navigate us out of that water back, off of life support more into a ICU unit. That's the way I describe it. But yeah, that's probably one of my favorite accomplishments because I feel like the stability the city has now, but it came at the back of the hard work of the people that we brought in to get it there, cutting things and not taking raises, not taking, Andrew I promoted Andrew to a job last year to fill in the gap. I didn't pay him the increase for over a year. So it's not like we just threw money at the problem. We actually all had to roll up our sleeves and do different tasks that I'm not accustomed to doing in my own capacity. But that's how we achieved it. So I know it's a big rant, but I'm pretty personal about it because there was a lot of sweat equity in that one that most people in the city wouldn't know that we did to cut our costs. So to go from $18 million down to $8 million in our debt to free up the cash just to buy cars, yeah, I think we've done a lot with the money that we had. So
Absolutely, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate all the hard work from staff. It's definitely been it's been fun to watch, from that time and then up to where we're at now and see the growth. I never expected Republic would be where we're at today. So I appreciate that sacrifice and all of that hard work. That's definitely something that's not commonplace in government. And so coming from Republic's government, thank you. I appreciate that. And I have a few more questions, not very many. Somewhere in, I believe it was on, I can't remember exactly which packet it was, whether it was our workshop or whatnot. There was mention of a SAFER grant, the Staffing for Adequate Fire and Emergency Responses. Is that something that, I think where I had read that was part of one of the proposals, but is that something that we can seek out regardless of whether or not we specifically go for a fire tax, or is that tied to fire?
Okay, so great question. So the SAFER grant, the way the SAFER grant works, and you know what we'll do? I'd like for us to create a slide to add to the slide deck that talks about the SAFER grant. The SAFER grant, how it works, and this is the best way, it's kind of like swiping a credit card and paying for it later. So it's great for...
Could you tell me what it is?
Okay, the SAFER grant is for firefighters only. And it's a grant program that allows you to hire firefighters, and you get the first year paid for in full.
Where's it come from?
Federal government. Okay. So, and the SAFER grant still applies. Chief, can you define SAFER grant? Just the definition of it.
It's funded through FEMA. It's a grant for staffing of the fire departments, for adequate staffing in the fire departments with your local staff.
Did it come? It came after Katrina, if I remember right. Did it not? No, that's not true.
Come after 9/11.
That's right.
It took a few years at the federal level to get it funded, to get it up, spot up and get going. But Mr. Cameron hit the nail on the head. It's like swiping a credit card. We'll get the grant. First year is 100%. Then it starts tearing down, and then the fourth year you're on the hook. Mr. Franklin, we don't mind applying for it. I'm not too sure we can fund it in 4 years.
After the 4 years in that time, unless there's a mechanism that comes up in the meantime.
That's correct. The difficulty in it when you're hiring someone, telling they're being hired under the SAFER grant, is we can hire you now. We're just not sure we can keep you in 2 years. because once you get to the second year, you're on the hook for 50% of it, I believe. So I'll verify that portion of it. But the SAFER grant was how the city hired officers, I believe, the last time, firefighters last time.
So just kind of hypothetical, if this proposal passes, if it goes to the voters pass it, is this still a grant that we can apply for to help and know that we still have that? I mean,
it is.
If we have a funding mechanism, we'll kind of know that.
Yeah, because see, the thing about it is, if it passes and you do a SAFER grant, the key is you want to build the financial position to pay for your public safety versus going out and saying, okay, it's passed, now let's go spend and hopefully catch up with it. We would not be hiring people immediately until you had, say, 90 days of collections, so you could say, we have a cash position to pay for it versus saying, hey, let's go hire, we'll wait for the cash position to come. So on the SAFER grant, it allows you a cash position that would build a cash position in the police and fire departments that if you had something, you needed a car, you needed something, it's in their account. It's if we get SAFER grant money, that's just a benefit to the public safety long term. I mean, I think every firefighter we hire moving forward, I don't care if it's now or when we do Station 3 and we have to hire 9 more, it'll be done through the SAFER grant. At least we'll apply for it with the funding mechanism.
And then that brings me to another question. So let's say we have the funding, we have the position, both for fire and police. What's the time frame between advertising that position and having an applicant, and then having that applicant with boots on the ground?
Well, that's a great question. So I'm going to say our target would be on the police side, because you've got psych evals, you've got testing that has to go through, you've got training that has to go through. So you're looking at 90 days to even from advertisement, 90 days best before you actually would have, say, boots on the ground. And I'm talking about, because the other thing about it is when you're short 12 people, it's going to take some time for people to get interested. But I'll tell you, if you adjust the retirement and you adjust the starting pay, we're going to draw a lot of interest just from the recruiting piece right off the bat. So I think between that and psych evals, testing, I'd say best case scenario, you would have them filled. It would take 12 months. It'd take a year.
About a year.
But you also got to find cars. You also got to find
equipment and
training.
Absolutely.
Putting public safety on staff is not going to be the same.
It's not just a salary. There's a lot that.
Yeah, water meter. Because you got fire
service. Yeah,
you've got to send. Even if you got candidates in the fire service, by the time you hire them, train them, and buy their turnout gear. I'd say probably both. And even with the SAFER grant, I think a lot of it would be the first thing that we do is probably get boots on the ground. The first 6 firefighters, I think it's the first 9, would have to be a priority to bring those on staff. So I'd say with strong recruiting, I'd say within a year we'd be substantially closer to where we need to be than we are right now. That'd be my ideal state would be 12 months from now, or from passages, that's where we'd be. It's a great question.
I've got a question, but I might have to go direct to Compton. Do you guys go through Tri-State, I believe?
Yes, sir.
What is Tri-State? I guess I don't know what Tri-State is, so I'm out of the loop on that one.
Sorry.
Tri-State Testing Alliance is a pool of fire departments in the southwest Missouri area and even mid-state that we pull candidates out of. So they go take their physical agility test and their written test through them, and then their name just goes into the pool. We pull from the pool and hire people. If there's good candidates in the pool, we hire from the pool. If not, then we will move on somewhere else, but we always go there first.
I learned something right there.
All I heard was pool.
That's why I wanted to Compton.
And then, actually, I think this question would probably be for Scott, and this is just kind of a clarification on the Missouri Constitution. Part of that, our measure on page 25, the City Sales Tax Act, excess of 2%. Is that 2%? Is that per proposal, or is that a grand total? So that 2% would include our current 1%?
It is a cap now. The state legislature has made multiple changes. It's called the City Sales Tax Act, and they've made multiple changes to it throughout the years. The latest change that they made caps it at 2% maximum. Now, you can only go for a maximum of 1% per proposal. So you could go 2 proposals, 1% each to equal your 2%. But the hard cap in a city of our size and our taxing ability is going to be 2%. Now, other cities have different rules, but ours is a cap of 2% on our general. And this is part of the general, so yes, it will go towards that 2% cap.
And so that's any combination there of like the 3/8 and the 3/8 a quarter, as long as it's general sales and it's 2% cap total.
That's correct. You know, before, I believe it was last year, they told us we could only do like a half or 7/8 or something like that. So if you looked at the old statute and you say, why are you doing 3/4? It's not allowed. Well, they changed the state statute to allow us to use any combination as long as we don't go over 1% in one election or a total of 2% total throughout the entire elections on our general.
And then on the ordinance, going back, page 26, section 5, it's the effective date of it passed. It didn't list a clear date. I think it did. I just didn't know how to find that date as to what it said. What is the...
I can tell you everybody's confused by it. State statute sets out the timeline for when the Department of Revenue receives notification, then they have to put it in their system. So they can't start collecting it until a certain quarter,
third quarter
afterwards.
or something.
My best guess is based upon if it were to pass, we were to get the certification in time, Laura then sends it off to the Department of Revenue. My best guess, and I'm pretty accurate, I think, with my guess, is going to be January 1st would be that quarter that it would start being collected in the city then.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Mayor, the one thing about it is that, but the interesting piece in the August ballot of 2017, we began to collect on that, and actually we began to see the receipts of that in October of 2017. It was extremely strange to see it that fast. So usually it's about 90 days, like what Scott is saying, but it's hit or miss. But in that ballot, I believe, Jared, if I'm correct, we began to receive receipts in October of 2017.
So we don't know.
No, it's
Government, right?
Best guess.
That's why we have.
But I mean, I'm with Scott.
attorneys
I'm
helping
with
us.
Scott. If we were going to be budgeting it, I'd be anticipating in August to say, because that's what we did with the August ballot in 2017. Was we started collecting was to target it for January 1st. It takes about 90 days.
And that was the 2017.
Yes, if I recall correctly, our first receipts came in. We started recognizing some money in October.
And this is just a kind of a general question. I keep coming across questions that I was the child that asked too many questions.
You're fine.
And I'm still that child
love
that
it.
asked too many questions. But so if approved by voters, let's say it's a 25-year tax, the voters approve it, it's out there 10 years down the line, a miracle happens, and we have all the funding we could ever ask for, the citizens are tired of the tax. Is it possible to repeal a tax that's been approved by the voters?
It is possible, but the voters have to repeal it.
The voters, so it would have to be a ballot issue and then a repeal.
That's correct. If the voters approve a tax, the voters have to also repeal a tax. And there is a procedure in place under the City Sales Tax Act also in order to repeal any tax that has been voted on by the citizens.
So would that be similar to like a recall election where you're saying it would take a certain percentage of people in a petition, or would that just be something that the council agreed on to put?
If the council could agree on it, it'd be something that the council could do via ordinance, similar to what they're doing now on this ordinance that puts it forth to the citizens for a vote on a tax increase. They can also put it forth in order to repeal a tax also.
Thank you. I was just trying to look at every door.
Can I elaborate on that?
Yeah.
Because there's other thing to consider as well, is because that's the piece that makes it probably the most concerning for me. Not so much that portion of it is, I don't want to be sitting there with a windfall going, okay, now what? So I think that that's part of the language is that in 2027 and 2028, we actually have two that do expire, that you will actually have the opportunity, the community will, whoever is, in those capacities would be evaluating, do we need to renew those, or is the cash position in a place that we do not have to add the quarter for the capital improvement sales tax or the 1/8 fire sales tax that's on the books now. So what if the position came about that the city was recognizing substantial growth in those numbers? The consideration would be, because if you look at the quarter-cent capital improvement sales tax, $1.1 million of that was just, again, that was something we had to do as part of that original budget, was to buy 3 cars a year for police. So it's kind of like, if there's a funding position that is strong enough to take care of that without actually having to have a tax to help part of the overall city, then I think that that's a consideration that the citizens could have, is not to renew either one of those, but both of those would just be as a case-by-case basis.
Thank you. And I was just kind of looking, it was something that came across my mind, and then I couldn't find any examples of that ever happening, and I was just kind of curious as to different areas.
While you're digging through your notes, I have a question. Sure. So you've explained this to me before, and it hasn't gotten through my skull, and I apologize. Why is a use tax not a good idea here?
Okay, so the use tax, do we have that slide that shows the use tax revenue? Everybody's shaking their head, looking at me like,
No. Sorry, my fault. That's what I get for asking a question.
No, it's a good question. That's one of my questions as well. Is
okay.
part of? So no, here, yeah, excellent.
So I'm going to do some math, and I'm not trying to throw numbers out to confuse. But anyway, because we do not have a use tax is basically, I guess you could say internet sales would be the best way I could describe it. And right now, last year's numbers, the city was qualified for roughly $7 million, and if we had a use tax, I believe $7 million of that would be qualified under the use tax. So basically, the theory is if we passed a use tax, then what businesses would have to do would be to register. So if they registered, then that number would substantially go up. So what we did when we ran the model of a use tax, we basically took the city, hypothetically, from a $7 million receipt to a $30 million receipt. So we compared that to Nix is what we did. So say Nix is collecting $30 million of qualifiable use tax referral. That would generate for the city only about $700,000 a year, so on the general fund. So the general fund would recognize about $600,000, but the way a use tax works is it has to be distributed with the tax brackets you have. So the parks would get a portion of it, street would get a portion of it, parks would actually get 2, street would get a portion, the 1/8 cents for apparatus, and then the general use. So basically it only applies to, but we'd only recognize even in our best case scenario, and that number is continuing to grow or climb in those cities, but the impact of what it is to the overall budget is very, very small. So it only represented, it was less than 25% of the need. That's why we did not pursue it.
So I have some follow-up questions.
Okay.
So I heard you say that you ran the model. Is this something that you guys dug into and really considered? Is this something that the city staff debated and talked about as far as a potential? Well, you laugh, so that's a bad sign. Like, is this something you guys really looked at before bringing the proposed sales tax to?
Absolutely. In fact, I would even go as far as to tell you that I actually thought that the numbers would be substantially different. So that was the actual first plan of the discussion was, let's run the use tax is the discussion. But when you saw the financial return, it was like you're not even getting 25% of the way. So the issue is going to be there. And the rate by which it's growing was like telling the community that the threat or the concern to it was, okay, going to the community saying, hey, listen, make this about public safety. And then it only gets you 20% of the way, then you go back and run a general use tax to say we got to get the rest of the way. It would be confusing saying, well, listen, because the consideration was to run them both, do a use tax, but having 2 questions and which one actually addresses it. And what I've learned from the last issue, a confused voter is a no voter. And so it's like if it's not simple and the use tax is extremely complicated, and if you look historically throughout this state, they are not very successful because a lot of it's just very confusing information. I'd say it's probably 8 out of every 10 of them are unsuccessful. And I'll probably being generous.
So, more follow-up. As I'm discussing it with people, the sales tax and that sort of thing, there's and the idea that the use tax could be growing and will be a bigger portion of income in the future potentially, right? Because it's a growing field. Did you run any projections on what you think in the future a use tax might be? And if you did run that projection, how far out would it be before we start capturing enough as opposed to a sales tax for law enforcement?
So we did not extrapolate that out past what we did on. I believe, yes, we did. We extrapolated that out over a 10-year period because we had to figure out what it would take us to occupy to accomplish hiring the police and fire. So in that information we provided at the first work session, there is in the financial section of that information, it extrapolated out over a 10-year period, and it showcased that if we used the use tax, it would take 14 years at that pace. It would take 14 years to actually meet the current staffing to adjust it to the right staffing level. So if we use the use tax and let it grow and grow into it, just to meet the minimum staffing levels of 2021 levels, it would take 14 years to accomplish it.
So we'll be 14 years behind.
Yes.
Okay.
Is there any part of that I misstated, Debbie? No. Okay.
Sorry, I know that's a weird question.
No, but I was like, I know we did it. I'm like, yes, it's actually outlined in that packet we provided at the first work session. The use tax is included, and it showcases how long it would take to actually hire 14 people in fire and 12 in police. It's about 14 years.
And Mr. Mayor, just to add to that, on the use tax, there is some competing proposals right now in the state legislature that would require cities to go out another time for a use tax vote. So if we were to look at putting something on the August ballot for a use tax, there's a potential that basically a few days later it would be nullified by a change in the state statute, and then we would have to go out again for another vote.
So the voters would love that.
Yeah, so I mean that also could weigh into any decision as far as a use tax at this point in time until that matter is clarified by the state legislature.
Scott, is that the Wayfair legislation?
It is. There's multiple competing ones right now, but that is one of those proposals that's out there.
Several different in committee or whatnot right now. Is that or just one? There's one use tax proposal at the state level.
Yeah, I believe the Wayfair one that I'm discussing now that would require cities with the current use tax to go out again for a vote is the proposal that has made it the furthest last time I checked.
So does that? And I haven't had a chance to really look into that too much. I know a little bit about it. Does that, if passed by the state legislature, does that proposal allow us to automatically collect that funding, or do we still have to go out and ask? If they pass that, we still have to go out and ask for the use tax regardless.
Yes.
Great question. So I asked that as soon as I saw that the Wayfair legislation, the first email I sent was to Debbie and to Scott, was to say, okay, do I understand this to say that we'd still have to go out for a use tax? The answer was yes, we still have to go to the voters.
Do we know if there's any sort of language that we could try to insert into that to change that to where a municipality would benefit from that?
No, the Hancock Amendment requires all votes of taxes to go out to the citizens. And the Missouri Supreme Court ruled years ago in the Greene County case that a use tax is a vote under the Hancock Amendment that must go out to the citizens.
You good?
Throughout this conversation, a lot of my questions you've answered. Typically, I'll come in with a laundry list of questions, but you answer a lot of them before we even get to asking them. So I really appreciate that.
All right, then. Yes, ma'am.
Something. I just want to say thank you, Mr. Franklin. I love your questions and I love
Thank you.
learning. I feel like I'm just like soaking it in because I'm new to this world, and I appreciate how much you are concerned for your citizens and the people that you represent. So I love it. I heard a quote the other day that said most people know enough to think they're right, but not enough to know they're wrong. So it's just good to like take in this information. And I wish the people of this community would see how much we're really digging in to figure out the best possible solution. So I appreciate it. I do have one question. I did get an email, and it was about, so once we are able to not keep taking from the general fund, if this tax were to go through, is one of our first priorities to focus back on the streets, to put that money into the street?
Yes, because I'm a public works director by trade, if I have one, so if I was to tell you the second problem we have would be transportation. I knew the freeze was going to be really dangerous for us. I think that the more you drive around, I think that the second part of it, which is why I would tell you, Jen, it's a great point, is we have got to take care of the transportation system, or it's going to be one of those things that takes care of us too. And so if you look at Miller Street just in front of it, driving down, like I mentioned in one of the discussions, when you see grass growing up in the cracks, that is a bad sign of, not necessarily that we're not taking care of it. It has to be a priority. So we actually have, like I've told Andrew, it's like we have got to queue up what all the stuff that we would do just to take care of the maintenance. And that's not just necessarily because someone says my road is bumpy. It's because what we've assessed and said, we've got to take care of that, or it's going to be a very costly fix to repair it in the future. So it would be a major priority for us, because it would add an additional $600,000 a year back to the street budget. It's just so confusing, because I tried to communicate that at the last measure, and they're like, so this is about streets? Well, it's like, well, it is about streets to some extent, because that money is sitting in this, from the street budget, is sitting in the police department.
I think it's hard, as I see comments on getting no Republic, it's hard for people to realize that there are defined areas where the money can go. They think that it's just a big pool that we just put wherever we want. So I think communicating that to the like figuring out how to do that. There's a lot of passionate people, but I wish they would come to the meetings to see how it all works and really gain wisdom from that. But and then also, I think communicating the sunset. You know, I think that's a really important thing. As some of these tax initiatives have a sunset, realizing that the tax could actually go down if we choose not to vote that back in. Am I seeing that?
You're correct. I mean, I think there's opportunity in 2017 for sure. We have a $0.25 on the books right now. And you got to look at what that $0.25 represents. That $0.25 represents Hines Street. So we got improvements that are included in there. We've got Hines. We had trails, the animal shelter, police cars, tornado sirens, radios. So if you look at what we had to do, that's why we're like, we got to get just the general tools in our hands. But there's about $2 million that was just for street. All those projects that we're taking care of with that money will expire in 2017. There's not going to be a laundry list of additional things that I'm even aware of, because a lot of that was transportation associated. Like, we don't have a funding mechanism to even take care of, you know, Hines and ZZ, big time problem, Lynn and Hines. So it's not just taking care of the streets, it's also taking care of the transportation system. So I think if you look at that, so it'll expire in 2017, I think that's the first place you would look, and that would take us back underneath the 9% threshold. So to me, unless we've come up with a laundry list of projects that I'm not aware of even in the present. But again, going back to Eric's original point, in 2016 when I got here, it was like, we're going to have to figure out a way to free up cash position on the general fund, and the police cars, we couldn't even buy them in 2017. So we actually utilized an expiring tax that was about stormwater just to shore up and kind of like help the cash position. It will expire in 2027, and I would strongly encourage us to look at what the growth is doing in the city. That's why we asked for 3/4, not a 1 cent again. Yeah. When I'm asked the question, why did I ask for a cent? You asked it for the last time. Did something change? Seeing that sunset coming up in 2027 says, well, let's just see how we grow and consider it from there.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
One of the questions that I've been getting, especially with citizens that's been here a while, so if it passes, how do we know they're going to use it for that?
So, great question. The ordinance that you're voting on that you'll see, it actually shows inside that, and in the ballot language itself, when it's written into the top of the ballot language, when it says public safety, that's how you know it has to go there. It cannot go into, I mean, administration does not qualify. All those on this other side of the sheet, on this graph, you know, it does not go into legal, it does not go into IT. There will be IT functions of the public safety side that takes care of it, but it's restricted. It's just like all your other accounts. So it's why we can't take money out of other accounts to pay for it now. Now, that being said, with the statement I made to start the day when Eric asked a question about what I did in 2016, having good auditors makes a big difference. And I'm not going to, boy, I gotta be careful how I word that. Your auditors are the ones that are going to account for how you maneuver those monies around, and so they're going to look at that every year. And if someone found through the audit that we were misusing that, it would be discovered in the audit through the receipt. So that's how you ensure it takes care of. Because we could say that all day, it's in the ballot language, but that's why you do an independent auditor or audit every year.
Well, the people that were concerned had been here quite a while and they knew how it
Used to be.
used to go.
So, I made a mistake, David. I read some Facebook comments. And I'm seeing assertions that, I didn't really think about, but I want to ask about because I want to see if there's something to it. And it's about business. You guys know I'm a lawyer, but I also own my own business, right? And the things that I consider when I open a business may be different than what you guys see for the businesses coming in. And maybe Macy's going to be interested in this too. When businesses are considering where to open up shop, I wouldn't consider sales tax because that's not what I do. But do you guys get questions when businesses start calling you and saying, hey, we're thinking about moving to Republic? What's your sales tax? And is that a reason that they're like, ooh? Because these Facebook comments are saying, it's going to keep new business from coming here. As people are applying for business licenses, as they're talking about moving their retail establishments to Republic, has that been an issue that the city has encountered? Now, of course, you don't know what goes on in their boardrooms, but is that some pushback that you guys are getting?
Not at all. And I'd actually go back to April of 2019 when we ran the last ballot issue. You might hear from someone saying, I'm not supportive of that from that perspective. But I think if you look from April when we were doing that and the growth that we were experiencing during that ballot initiative, even though we were considering an additional 1 cent, we didn't miss a beat. I mean, so even during the consideration, we had from October of 2018 that discussion all the way up to the ballot of April of 2019. And if you look at that season of our growth and development, there was nothing that was discouraging. I think our property tax is a very attractive piece to our community. I think our school districts are a very attractive piece. I think, I was, like, again, being in Northwest Arkansas and being the third fastest growing MSA in the nation at that time, our sales tax rate in our communities were 9.25%. I mean, sales tax was not moving businesses away. If people want to live there and that quality of life and that's what they want, that's what we're going to do business. I mean, not just my feeling to it, my experience tells me that that's not been a deterrent. And again, that's one person's position, but that's one person's experience that's actually seen the numbers grow even when you increase it. So,
And infrastructure, transportation, getting into out of Springfield.
Yeah, I would say that the data that I received this morning, and I can provide this, is that we've had in the next between overall, is it $60 million? We've had within the next 5 years, we'll have over $60 million of investment from outside investment developers just in our public infrastructure. That's insane. So when I tell you about being one of the fastest growing communities in the state, or if not the fastest growing, that's an insane amount of assets that we've added that are not necessarily on the taxpayer's back. So our infrastructure is growing, and not necessarily because our citizens are paying for it. So if you look at the total number of investment from the outside world, it is exponentially more than it was in my first year. So I'm not seeing anything that's a deterrent through our sales tax rate. I think our property taxes being low give us a competitive advantage with everything. I mean, if you look at it, the average citizen is not paying near the amount of money they're paying to live in Nixon, Ozark, just because our property tax is so low.
Mr. Mayor, and one thing I'd like to make mention of as well,
Great question.
I appreciate this example here with the different tax rates. One of the major concerns, even that I'm dealing with personally, and I know most of the people that I work with every day are dealing with, is the extreme rise in cost. And so almost everything that we use, it's the bread and butter of building a home, has tripled. And just as an example, to clue you into what some of us are experiencing, about this time last year, pre-COVID, I could get a roll of 14-2 wire, which is just your standard used throughout the entire house pretty much. It cost me about $38 a roll. It fluctuated a little bit, but only by $1 or $2. At that time, buying a roll in Republic, and I realized this doesn't all go to Republic, but this is a total tax, $3.17. Fast forward to March 16th. March 16th, that same roll cost me $90, and I was paying $7.52 in tax on that. Fast forward to March 28th, which is just I don't know if that was yesterday or today's the 2 days ago. So 2 days ago, $113. And so that very same roll of wire that takes a tall stack of those wires to wire a house that I was paying $38 for, I'm now paying $9.43 in tax per roll. That extends to lumber, PVC, almost everything in there, and it's a lot of people that I've talked to. It's very nerve-wracking. I mean, as you sit there, it's very. I'm dealing with issues with this as well. I've been essential working through COVID the entire time. That has not affected me personally. It's affected my family and the other side, but not me personally. What's coming now and this price increase is affecting me more than COVID ever did. More than the shutdown, more than anything. And I don't like using myself as an example, but this is a message that is relayed to me as well by every day, everyone around me. So this is what I hear every single day. It's hard because this isn't exactly something that most of this community can turn around and ask for a price increase. That's what the building industry is known for, coming up with a different price later than what you started with. And in this industry, a lot of times you're thinking 6 months to a year ahead for what you're doing today. And that's the position I'm in. And when I look ahead to the future, and I look ahead to the future of several people around me, it's scary is what it is, especially if these prices continue. And so in a lot of ways, a lot of us have contributed a significant amount more in sales taxes. And so sales tax rate, it affects everyone differently. As a normal consumer, everyday citizen, you're probably not going to see that much of a difference. It's insignificant, I'll admit. But when you start getting into the small businesses that aren't necessarily a storefront, or the mom and pop, the garage businesses, it can have an effect, especially if you're trying to make a product to sell to someone. It's heavy. It's a heavy load, and so that's a concern. And
that's reasonable. And Eric, you're in a tough spot because you wear multiple hats.
Absolutely.
Because as a business owner and as a family man, you're wearing a hat that this is hurting your pocketbook. As a council member, you have to think about what's best for the citizens.
Absolutely.
Different hat.
Absolutely.
And man, switching back and forth has got to be hard.
And that's part of it too. I really appreciate this conversation and looking at it. Being Mayor Pro Tem has really kind of opened my eyes into looking at things from a different standpoint than just solely a council member. If anything were ever to happen to our mayor,
God forbid.
Absolutely. In no way, I'm not trying to jinx anything. But that depends on decisions in the future, and I'm aware of that. So I'm not trying to overstep anyone's boundary. I'm just looking at this from a standpoint of a council member, as a concerned citizen, and as a Mayor Pro Tem as well, and trying to. It's really helped me dive deeper into the issue, and so I appreciate that very much.
What I love about diving deeper is because when you're in my position, you carry the weight of it and trying to communicate that with the citizens to say, do you understand? All I want you to understand is that this happens. And people are like, well, I don't want to use gloom and doom. I don't want to use fear tactics. Mm-hmm. They're like, do you understand the weight that's there? And I appreciate the fact that people would dive into it to say, wow, I start to have a different perspective. I start to see it. That's all I could ask from anybody is like, how do we navigate through the concern that I have as your official that's telling you there's a concern? I'm not saying that the way it's presented is right. I'm just saying it's the best that I know how, or what I believe is right. But I appreciate people diving into it to learn more about it so that we can have this kind of dialogue.
Absolutely. And then touching on what Jen said, the questions from council, I mean, I learn from everyone in here every time we're in here. I look at this as an opportunity for me to learn more to better represent the citizens. And so anytime there's a question, by all means, I love to hear it because it gives me perspective both on our personalities, our diversity as a council, and helping to represent the citizens better.
Mr. Silf.
March 1st, I celebrated 15 years in business here in Republic. And throughout that course of time, getting involved in different organizations, whether that be the Kiwanis Club or onto the Chamber Board, you gravitating towards City Council, you learn a little more as you get into it, obviously. But the citizens of Republic, I hope that they have some sort of viewpoint that our city is more transparent than almost any other city around us. And when it comes to government, I have to thank you two, everyone involved in this. Whether it's this subject or another one, We have more transparency than any other governmental entity that I know of. So I just want to bring that up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I agree. From my research, I agree. Yeah.
I think the most difficult part that in my career, experience-wise, is because there's so much frustration at a federal and state level, it has to be going on at the local level. And that's the hardest part. I wish you could open up the windows and say behind it, and when people could actually see it. So I've seen the screenshots, the things that are just do this and you're not doing this and something's going. I'm like, wow, I wish people could really look inside. I wish we had a way. But you're not gonna make everybody happy, nor do we. Our thing is to be as most transparent as we can. I think it's so difficult because what happens at the federal and state level immediately says that must be happening at the local level too, and it's just. All level of politics are just kind of warped into one and says, listen, you all must be doing it that way as well. And we're the closest form of government to the people. I mean, we provide the most closest access and the services that affect them all. The transportation systems, we're the ones that are going to hear about it. You know, safety, we're the ones going to hear about it. And I just think we've done a better job of communicating and getting that out there. Ideally, you would love for people just to see your true heart. You're not really trying to make it that difficult. You're just trying to address the deficit and the safety of those officers that are going there out there to take it. That's the primary piece of it, and they're well paid and compensated for it.
And this meeting today as well is.
Yes.
Mr. Wilson?
Yes.
Well, say you got buy $100 worth of stuff, that's just gonna add an additional 75 cents to the $100, right?
Well, yes. On just if it's food, it's not the same.
Food. But what I was getting at, you can't drive to Springfield for 75 cents.
Yeah. Well, what I think I'd like to do now is go around and make sure that everybody has a chance, even if it's say nothing at all. I just want to make sure that we all sit and think about these things and come up with questions later, and I don't want to discourage that, but I don't want there to be a person that feels like they haven't had a chance to say their say. So, Mr. Wilson, do you have any final thoughts or comments you'd like to put out there?
No, I've pretty much said what I
Perfect.
said I'd say.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Mitchell? Excellent. Mr. Duggan?
Well, I got a question, and I don't know my experience from being involved with government in Arkansas was on the fire side. I know that, you know, it says that you should have a minimum of 15 firefighters, you know, on a scene. And of course we can't because we don't have the people. And it's been quite a few years ago in Arkansas. I know there was a town a little smaller than we are, had financial problems, and they tried to do a sales tax and it failed. Well, they just continued as they are, and then down the road, the insurance commission came in that does the rating, your city rating on fire, and said you don't have the proper amount of staff to maintain this rating. So the rating went up, and I knew some people that, you know, it was costing them $400 or $500 a year for that other fire rating. And I didn't know if that's a national thing or if that's state.
Could I speak on that?
Yeah.
So when it comes to ISO rating, Dwayne, we've talked about this in the past. That is a concern, not what it used to be, still a concern. The insurance, everyone has mutual aids. So we've done a great job. Everyone around us, everyone's done a great job of apparatuses, mutual aid agreements. But insurance companies in general, can't say every one of them, insurance companies in general, though, are more concerned about wind and hail than they are fire. Okay. Not, again, still a concern, but maybe not to the tune of that. So.
I just, you know, I didn't know, and that was just a question I had. And another thing on police and fire, because I have in years past was a police officer and a deputy sheriff, is I think, especially on our police department side, they are out here, sometimes feels like they're by themselves or are, because we don't have enough people to proper back up and so on, that if we had more personnel, the officers we have, I feel, and firefighters would feel, you know, as a city, we're doing what we can to more or less protect them, let them know that they're going to a better chance of coming home tonight. Because, you know, well, David knows because he was in Arkansas back, you know, in the time frame when I was on the sheriff's office, and Benton County was a big county, and there was nights there was 2 of us covering the whole county because we didn't have the money to add people. And it really makes you think, do I really want to do this? Because I've got to think about my family. And so, you know, I feel that it's something that needs to be done. And sure, nobody hates taxes worse than I do. But the way I look at it is we know we have a lot of people from Springfield, from other towns that come here to our restaurants. They come here to shop for a lot of reasons. One, they're, you know, not as crowded, or, you know, lots of things. So it allows us to be able to collect some funds for our city that they have paid for, that they live in Springfield or wherever, because they're using our streets, they're using all of our stuff. They have an accident, they're going to use our police officers, or, you know, this type of thing. So I feel that it's, you know, if it was just covering people that lived in Republic, that'd be one thing. But, you know, anybody that comes to Republic is going to pay the same as what we would. And that's why I feel, you know, we've got to get our police and fire as top priority in my books, and then streets would be after that. So we definitely need that. But police and fire has got to take top priority.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Updike.
Question to Chief Sells. I know the fire uses Tri-State Alliance for a pool of candidates. Do you guys have a pool that you guys, or is it all just based off individually?
Are you talking about like hiring?
Yeah.
We do ours internal. We've had some discussions with Drury University and some of the cities up here on the PowerPoint of doing something similar to that, but right now it's all internal.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Mr. Franklin.
I would just like to add, you know, a lot of the things that I look at when I'm considering an ordinance or whatever's here before us, you know, especially when it comes to taxes, I definitely see the need, and I most certainly support police and fire. It's like we had discussed earlier, certainly uncertain times, and what we see on the news, especially with the federal government, state government, what's occurring with the police department, that causes great concern with me as well. Not in my backyard is my view for a lot of that, and keeping that away is definitely a priority. I'm looking at you know, the burden that this would give to others, and if that outweighs the need. I'm looking at, as currently proposed, if that goes to voters and passes through this council, it goes to the ballot. What happens, A, if it passes, and what happens, B, if it fails? And so that took me several different directions, a lot of which I didn't necessarily have a chance to explore every different path, but it truly brought me to some dedication and a challenge to find it, regardless of whether this passes or fails, and to find a solution and to try to frame it in a way that I could sell it. Because anytime there's something here and I have to give it to the public, I kind of look at it as I have to sell it. I have to be a salesman for the idea or the need, just as much as the city needs to sell it to us as a council. And so I'm dedicated to finding a solution, short term and long term, and regardless of whether or not this passes or fails. I'm dedicated. I'm here for the long haul. But it's just kind of different perspective as I'm looking through. If this goes to the voters and it doesn't pass, what kind of a message is that going to send to the next time? Because the need will not go away, and it's going to become a harder sell. And so I'm always looking for any kind of an adjustment just to make it more palatable for to get more people on board to get something passed. When I ran for election, my first election, of course, I had lost, which that was a great learning opportunity as well. And I looked into running again, and you know, my thought in my head is, this is a small town, word travels quick, I need to be careful of what I do. If I run again, I need to make sure and ensure myself that I can win. And that was all the confidence I needed to get up here. And so I just look at it with, you know, I've been told more times than not that it can't be done, and I'm not referring to staff, I'm just in general all around. And so I'm excited to look for solutions, more solutions. I'm excited for this measure to see if it's possible to present that to the voters in a more presentable way, possibly, based on some of the concerns and some of the things people have told me. And then I have a few solutions as well that it's all ideas, it's all learning. And so I realize it's not perfect, I'm not perfect. But that's all I had to say, other than the proposals for after. But
I'm pausing because I'm thinking you put a lot of information out there, and thank you. So do you have further proposals that the staff needs to hear about?
And that's it, and I don't necessarily want to call them proposals. Being kind of an open work session, I just put myself to the exercise, and staff presented for us several proposals, and so I made an effort to present to myself several proposals and work through them through myself. I haven't had a chance to discuss this with staff yet. Obviously, it took me a lot of time to go through this and put some of this together. This has been a several-year journey, of course. When you deal with COVID and everything else, it matters to the community. It matters to, I mean, it's put a damper on a lot of different things, and throughout COVID, raising taxes wasn't really something. I admit, a long time ago, I should have been doing more work to try to help funding.
How about this?
And community is another aspect of it, I believe, as well.
I would suggest this. We have a vote coming up next week on whether or not we're going to put this tax on the ballot. Mm-hmm. This workshop was created for an opportunity to make sure that we leave everything on the table. So if you have proposals about something that you think would be in lieu of the tax, I think now's the time to hear them, man.
Okay. No, absolutely. Awesome. And no, I appreciate that.
Because this is going to be a situation where we're going to have a vote next Tuesday.
And we've had our first read. It's on to the second read.
Yep.
And I absolutely understand that. That's why a lot of these areas that I do want to work on and I do want to improve on, I haven't necessarily been able to further, because I'm concentrating on next Tuesday.
Well, and if you've got a proposal, let's see if it's a viable proposal. So,
sure.
Proposal one.
And I'll be as quick as I can. So based upon what talking with people and what I've found out, trying to figure out the police and fire, specifically for public safety, that definitely helps. It's still it's a hard ticket to sell, the 9% and above rate, and that's just it's just been what's been relayed to me over the years. The 9% is just that's kind of that hurts a little bit. And so what I did was I looked back at what we have now current in front of council, and other than amending it somehow to get it down to 8.9, or I don't know if can we amend the percentage of that as well in the ordinance, or is that kind of set? We can adjust that to the 1%.
Anything in the amendment can be proposed, anything in the ordinance can be proposed as an amendment by council, and then council could vote on changes to that as a whole. If the majority votes in favor of it, then that would change the ordinance. If it does not vote in favor of it, then the ordinance stays as it is.
Okay, so we can amend both the amount and the sunset date.
Yeah, the only thing I would ask is if that proposal is contemplated, that maybe you contact me beforehand.
Absolutely.
I don't like to write stuff out especially a ballot measure. I would ask if you can get with me beforehand, so I could maybe have some proposals if that were to proceed.
Absolutely. And so looking at that current proposal, currently as is, that's really my only solution to get it to a condition that I could sell that to the people. And I'm not trying to kick the can down the road. I have a few different scenarios with a timeline, looking at this from like an 8-year perspective. And so the current one, as is, I think it would have to be amended in order to not necessarily pass council, but to pass the voters. I think that it would need some amending.
So I want to make sure I'm understanding what you're saying. You think that 9.0 is a magic number, and you think that if it was 8.99999 or some other number below that, that you feel like your constituents would get behind that as opposed to a 9.0?
I'm not saying that's absolute, but when you look at marketing for televisions and whatnot, how many times do you see a television for $49.99 instead of $50?
All right. So I'm interpreting this as a sales position. Mr. Cameron, in your conversations in coming up with a 3/4 cent proposal, did you consider the, and I know the city can't advocate, so I'm not suggesting that you're trying to sell a number, but did you discuss or consider a magic number of a 9.0?
No.
Why not?
Because the reason why is because you have multiple taxing districts. So saying that the 9.0 is a barrier has already been broken all over the region. So it's like people are utilizing a higher tax rate in different taxing districts. But the most pressing piece of it is because we are so transparent, communicating to the public because I don't believe the public would understand that if you're saying this is for public safety, this will address public safety. It does not address, it will address a portion of public safety. And so our belief was to put what would address the need versus going back out saying, oops, we missed it by 1/4%. Now we're going back out again. And the lack of trust in that would be you didn't plan for it accordingly and tell us what you need. So you told us what it would take to get it passed. And I think that's what went into our thinking was, if you're just trying to do something that'll get a pass, and then you'll say it doesn't really meet the need. For me, it would be kicking the can down the curb and leaving it the way in a very difficult position for anyone that followed after us, because they'd have to explain why we conceded that part. So our position was we considered 5/8, a half percent, which we put it in the last work session, what a half would do, a 5/8 would do, and what a 7/8 would do. And so. But to Eric's point, I want to go back to the point that he did make, is after the last ballot measure, we did look at, okay, we evaluated what didn't go right, the citizens, the feedback was, if it was just about public safety, if it would have had a sunset, and if it was for a little bit, what it was. So we adjusted all three things. We created a sunset, reduced it to 3/4, and so that's what was the consideration for the measure. But we never considered 9% as being as a cap.
You took out items in the ballot measure, you lowered the percentage, you put a sunset on it.
That's correct. And the other thing about it is, to your point, what we also considered was that in 2027, we have an expiring one that would take us below the 9% for consideration. So just all that pieces that you want to keep it as low as possible. I mean, the idea is to keep it, nobody wants to increase it. So if we can drop stuff off at that stage, but knowing what those things were created for versus the structure we have in place now, I believe how we develop and get to those places and utilize those taxes if they're ever needed would be viewed completely differently than what it was in 2016. But
Mr. Franklin, hearing that explanation about the way that 3/4 cent sales tax was brought up, I get where you're coming from. Who doesn't want a $49.99 object as opposed to a $50? I get it. But we're going to have people that say no new taxes.
No, and I completely understand.
Can I ask, is it 0.01% less? Did I do the math right? I don't know if I did. Anyways, would that get you on board behind the tax? Because I feel like what the best opportunity, because I think we realize we need money in the budget, is to provide a united front. So, if you look at it and say 0.01 or whatever it would be, if it's make or break, I think we have to evaluate that, because I think the united front, I think each of us as council members educating, I think it's just a matter of education, just the public, because if they saw this information, saw what we're going through to, do the best for them, I think they would really be behind it. But I think the united front is really our best opportunity to see this thing succeed.
Wait, yeah, what's it going to take, Eric?
And so I just want to clarify. I see the need, and I see that that need. What I'm looking at trying to do is soften that blow, and I don't want to call it kicking the can down the road, but when I look at all of our taxes and how many different times we're going to have different ballot proposals if we seek to renew some of these taxes, I see a timeline that lets more of a gradual. And I understand there's a need, and we want it tomorrow, and I want to be able to provide it tomorrow, but at the same time, being able to sell that to the people, because even if I say yes in here, as soon as I go to the people, I can't guarantee they're going to feel the same way about it, and so I would have to sell it to them, and I want to feel comfortable selling it to them.
So I haven't heard you answer a question yet.
Which question?
If it was the number you want, the $49.99 version, and I'm not suggesting we amend anything, I'm just asking, if it was the $49.99 version where it was just a 0.0001% below 9, would you say, yes, you're behind this?
I would definitely give it further consideration.
That wasn't an answer. So, and that's fine. If the answer is no,
and I just
great.
hate to say definite yes or no because I don't want to stop the discussion. And so I'm going to take what we learned here today and prepare myself even further for Tuesday, just to mentally prepare myself. If can I say yes? Can I say no? Can I sell it? And so,
Mr. Self.
So, by saying yes on Tuesday, it is not saying I vote for the tax. It's saying this is what's great about this particular piece. We get a vote to say yes, to give it to the citizens, to let them vote up or down. So voting yes, voting no Tuesday is simply saying, hey, are you going to allow this to go in front of citizens?
And there's a point when the discussion does have to stop. We just have to be decided. We have to make a decision because we can talk about this all day long.
And I agree.
So there is a point when, yes, we just give it to the citizens to decide. But I think you have to have a decided heart to be able to communicate to the citizens why you support it, whether that is at 9% or 8.9%.
And I agree, and part of it, and I see it as my job as a representative of the people. Anytime we go to an election, and I'm not saying that this isn't falling on the backs of the citizens, but the percentage of people that come out to vote, even the devoted people, even on a higher election, is not capturing the full percentage population of Republic. And I don't know if there's really anything we can ever do about that. But so I just want to make sure that I expend every possible effort before we go to that step of sending it to the voters to let a small portion of Republic voters decide for the rest of Republic voters a tax measure or whatnot. And that applies to everything. So there's no ideal world where I'm going to be satisfied, but it's still a small percentage of people in Republic that are going to decide whether we have a tax for the next, at this point, in 25 years. So I definitely want to take that into consideration.
Mr. Mayor?
Sir.
So just one point of clarification about the 3/4 is, if you recall, in the 3/4 amount, it does not get us to the total. I think the part that internally that I struggle with, that as long as everybody understands it, we did not put out a ballot measure that actually quite gets us there. We're allowing us a position that allows us to grow into the number. If we change it or reduce it, all I want is the community in that transparency piece to understand. We can't throw up those numbers and say we'll get to 1.9, we'll hire 12 or 14, because the funding position will not. That's the part that concerns me. The confusion will be, we're going to take care of this and this is all that'll come with it. That will not come with it, because now we've just lowered the amount of money. We're like, okay, this is what we could do. So again, it does not really meet the need, and I don't want that to be perceived like, hey, this meets the need. As long as we all understand that in this room as well, if there's an amendment to change it, I'm not going to get into whether there should or shouldn't be. We presented what I believe is comfortable with our growth rate, that we could grow into the numbers. My only concern would be that there's a misunderstanding amongst the electorate to say, I thought this took care of it. This gets us right to the threshold with our growth, that they're mirroring at the same time, that let us grow into the 2.7 million versus saying we're asking for it all now knowing we're going to grow. I believe we can grow into the number, but if we start regressing back, we have to cut that proposal back. So all those slides that we're presenting, like, well, you said we're going to get this, this, and this, those slides would need to change to reflect the change in the ordinance. So whatever's out there right now would have to change to reflect what the revenue would be. And so that to me would be a very confusing piece, because I believe what we presented mirrors the two that gets us there with our growth and what we're seeing at the same time, and with the expiration of those taxes. So I just want to be very clear about changing or amending it. We will have to change our messaging, and I think the concern would be, we'll now see they're changing it on us. And I think that would be a real difficult sell on the trust factor. So I believe we've been transparent with what we need versus saying we moved it to get to them to support. I think that's a very difficult sell when you know, well, that's what you said you needed. Why'd you change it down to something less to get us to support it? I think got to be a real challenge.
Mr. Duggan, you had something.
Well, just Mr. Cameron pretty well answered, what the question was, but a comment on it is, yes, we're going to, if this gets us close to where we need to be, even if it got us 100% paying for everything, 5 years down the road, we're going to grow, so you're going to need more people. So I don't think you could ever be where you've got all the money you're going to need because of growth. And I hope we continue to grow as we have. So, I can see it where it's a continuing thing that we're going to have to look at funding, but I think this would get us to where we need to be for now until down the road. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Franklin.
And maybe it'll help. I actually only have two proposals. We've pretty much filled out my other one, and I want to be aware of our time as well. I'll just kind of run through this. This is my free thought, and so by all means, cut it apart, whatever we need to do. And if we want to meet later on for that confidence in the future, I would love to meet as well, just because of keeping that confidence as a part of my plan as well. So this tax in my own personal plan is only a small portion of it. There's what happens during the tax, what happens after the tax, and further on. So I'm dedicated to finding other different ways as well. But some of the proposals that I've come up with, and I just kind of want to put this into a time frame, just to kind of give you some understanding of why I kind of came to the conclusion of trying to manipulate that just on playing the long game. One of my ideas is the fact that what if we started with the property tax increase, and we set that first increase to 1.3, 1.6 million or somewhere in there, and we set that on the ballot. Well, then if I'm looking at that as a starting point, that maintains our 8.35% tax rate. And then moving on into 2023, 2024, we have two taxes expiring. We have in 2023 the capital improvements park sales tax, which is 1/4 cent, and then the general park sales tax. So if we're looking to either renew those or do something differently, we're going to have a ballot issue anyway. And so I don't know, between passing that property tax increase and spending the time between now and 2023, 24, educating the public and showing the public, keep showing them what we're doing, and then possibly at that time, we make a decision on which one of those sales taxes that we want to pursue for renewal, or we could look at it with a new tax to just kind of spread it out and give some COVID relief time, let all of this take its course. Looking into 2023, you come into the capital parks improvement tax that's set to expire. We can do a number of things at that point. We can look for a different tax, pursue that one, or let it expire. If we let that tax expire, that takes us down to 8.15%. And then as we're looking into 2024, we have a general parks renewal, which will have a ballot that year as well. 2027, we have capital improvement sales tax that we could either pursue or allow it to expire. And I'm looking at each one of these different years as another opportunity to reassess what we have doing as well. And so I'm not trying to overcomplicate it. It's really hard to find an alternative other than the ones you've presented, because it takes a lot of digging and looking and thinking. But 2028, all the way into 2028, we have the 1/8 cent fire sales tax that expires, and of course we'll have to either renew that or allow that to expire. But that gives us several different opportunities to keep our tax rate low, still look for funding, and work towards that goal, and have it more able to sell it to the public when you're dealing in those smaller fractions and you're not dealing with such a big amount, and hopefully allow us to grow and give us some revenue as we go. And I know we have the projections, but really looking back, I mean, you can never really, projections are good for a certain point, but and so that was just kind of, my first proposal is just to look at it as a cautious standpoint, start with a property tax, kind of do a reassessment every little bit, every time we come to one of these tax proposals, and see what we have left, what we can offer, what we can sell to the public at that time. And that's just to make it easier to sell to the public. But it would allow us to even drop our sales tax rate down to potentially a much lower level than we are now, even if we added another property tax in the middle, like one property tax and then add another property tax later on to kind of try to bring. And I understand the funding of that is slower, and so some of the questions that you've answered today want me to go back and look at my proposals again. So again, these aren't perfect.
No, but that's the point of having this session.
Right,
So
absolutely.
I'm hearing you say that you want property tax rather than sales tax to go slow, potentially let other sales taxes expire. So in your decision to come to council with this proposal of a 3/4 cent sales tax, did you consider raising property taxes? And if so, why did you not go that route?
Okay, so we did consider that. So in the first workshop, that I included the property tax consideration of if we were to increase the valuation to 73 cents, similar to NICSA, which is the scenario I provided on the slide today. That was the original consideration, was something like that. However, to meet the and I believe that generated $1.6 million. Right, I believe that valuation got us to around 1.6, 1.7. The two things that was the consideration was that only the residents of Republic would be paying for it versus the police and fire. All the accidents that happen on 60 are not necessarily residents of Republic. That cost to generate, I believe that $332 would have been the equivalent of around $40,000 in sales tax that each household would have to spend to generate that. So we viewed that to be substantially more than what the citizens would be paying if they increased the sales tax. So that was the first one. The second one was that we have historically low, or I wouldn't call it historic, we're substantially lower by about 50 cents than NICSA and Ozark. And I think that the difficulty that I have experience-wise is running ballot measures in contrary with, say, the school district. So say we were putting something out there, utilizing property tax in conjunction with the schools, so now you have public safety versus teachers. So you do not want to be in concert with those situations where you're working with them. It'd be a discussion that we'd have to have with the Republic School Board at the same time, is like, hey, listen, where does your position, as for us entering into the same area that we've historically never gone to the voters and asked them to participate in funding those efforts, are you I'm not really sure from a relational perspective that helps the collaborative effort with those. So I think that's what went into the discussion, was an increase of 73 cents would only get us would leave us about $1 million short of the need. And also at the same time, that local citizens would be the only ones paying for public safety when other people experience the value of it, and then the school district.
And one of the things that kind of brought me into that scenario was just the fact that looking at Nixon, looking at Ozark, and I was trying to figure out, how are they funding it and keeping it where their sales tax rates are. And that's just what I kind of found too, is the fact that their property taxes are a little bit higher, which nobody likes taxes. I don't like any taxes other than what's absolutely necessary. But that was just kind of looking through that was what brought me to that. When I look at the property values of the homes in Republic, the improvements in the city in the last several years have definitely improved property values. And so I was just kind of looking at that, the increase in properties values, as being a potential area that may be less harmful than a sales tax rate for some individuals. But
Mr. To clarify that point, yeah, the property values are going up, but the Hancock Amendment rolls them back. So if we taking that consideration that it levels out the property tax, so our valuation is all that drops. So our revenue does not increase because we're capped by the Hancock Amendment for what that is. So yeah, even though it is growing, we're only limited in what we can recover of all the new growth that's going on, and even the valuations going up. We're only allowed to cover 2% of that.
For growth, for growth, that's the Hancock Amendment is.
Yeah, even your own
growth.
valuation, we're not allowed to capitalize. We're allowed to bring the growth is brought in at the back end of the number. So we as residents, like with the Amazon project, and you see people expressing concern over well, you abated the taxes for them. We didn't abate them all, but at the same time, it's because we don't capture it all. We're capped by the Hancock Amendment, so it benefits the business, but the Hancock Amendment keeps us from capitalizing on it substantially. So there's a lot of pieces there that our growth and development on the residential side will not recover those funds because it's limited. So even if we add a property tax, it does not get to grow because it's capped by the Hancock Amendment. Or the sales tax, it could grow with the growth and development of the community because it's not capped.
I think one thing to point out too is actually, I love this Lowe's receipt because I think that's something we can actually show to people, like tangible, that they can see. Is there's SID districts, in Ozark, in Springfield, sometimes you're paying 10%, like if you're at Sam's Club on the south side. We don't have any of those districts here, do we?
We have zero.
We have
None.
zero. So I think this is really cool, tangible, like, evidence that you can hand to somebody that they're paying higher property taxes and paying higher sales tax in some of their districts, and we aren't doing that. We're doing neither.
But I also think the reflection of the receipt demonstrates that the 9% threshold is not a barrier for someone purchasing.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Franklin, I've heard you have two proposals. One is the sellability of a over 9-point interest or sales tax, and that's a concern to you. And the other one is a property tax. Are there other proposals you want to put forward to have questions answered by the city staff today?
I'm sure I'll come up with some more between now and Tuesday, but no. And a use tax was something else that I was looking at as well. I know that I appreciate the comments today in regards to the use tax and having just a better understanding of that and the way for legislation. That really kind of describes it, where I've kind of come to at it. I'm looking at trying to soften the blow and split it up and use time to our advantage. Use the collaboration of council, what we can do in our communities, what we do between now and then is helping this progress through the long term. But it's just hard right now with where we're at and where everyone's at and what's been relayed to me through the community. A tax increase is hard either way you look at it. And so I don't know if I really have more to add to that. I think our discussion today has has made this a really good exercise for me.
That's why we're here.
That's as far as proposal. I don't know necessarily that I would have more to add to that. As far as questions, at this point, I think you've kind of satisfied my questions, and I appreciate it.
Mr. Self.
I've actually had a couple people that were against it. But for reasons being of clarity, how does it go to public safety? We've talked about that. And in our ordinance, it says, hey, designated for public safety, but down here it says general sales tax. Or on page this, it says here. And so in the educational piece of it, I would just, kind of reiterate the third time, fourth time, fifth time, whatever we need as far as how that is designated. I think that clarity is crucial into the public's view. But I've also had several people for it. So literally the one or two that I've had discussions with were against it because of the designation. And so I feel in our talks in the first work session, this work session, the first read, I feel comfortable with what you say in the ballot measure, and we've also talked about, hey, if this is not used correctly, that it can actually be brought back to the city as a suit, right?
That's
so Yep.
That is correct. It has happened before where citizens do have the standing to bring suit against the governmental entity if they do not follow their own ordinances, and in particular if they do not follow the ballot question.
And it would be discovered in the audit.
Correct.
So the citizens would see it, they would find, it would be an audit finding, and most likely it'd be a material finding, so it'd be publicly discussed. This would not be like, hey, like I met with our auditor last week for 4 hours. So it's basically, it is a very thorough review of what's going on in our organization. He does not get to say, hey, listen, could you fix that before I get my report done? There's no way in an independent audit that those things can be worked out where they're never brought to the light. So they have to be brought out regardless if, I know the guy or lady. It just, you do not get it's independent. So it's independent of my position, or anyone in my position, or even an elected official cannot move. They have a standard that they have to meet, an ethical standard, or otherwise they're in violation of it. So.
But I stated it earlier, the transparency piece to me is also the confidence piece, right? Of saying, hey, we wouldn't be bringing this need up here if we didn't feel like we had to have it. If it's something that, and Mr. Franklin even stated, I don't want to pay any more taxes other than something that I then absolutely have to have. And so I don't believe the city to bring this to us if it's not something that we absolutely have to have. From the 2016 that I have been on city council to now, so many changes have happened. We have a lot of great people in key positions, and we have a lot of great employees in general. But what we do as a organization to the final product, I've said this in multiple meetings, but our final product to the citizens has stepped its game up tremendously from what it was in the past. And again, nothing on the prior regime or Mr. Wilson or anyone, Mrs. Poole that's been here for years. What has happened in the recent years has been tremendous. And again, as far as the citizens, I hope that they can see the transparency that their local government has compared to others. So,
Thank you, sir. Mr. Franklin, I saw you raise your hand. Did you have something else?
I lost it.
All right.
Probably a good thing at this point, right?
As this is a workshop, I wanted, Mr. Eisen, did you hear anything today, and I'm putting you on the spot, that you feel like needs to be clarified from a legal point of view, or something that you had a concern that made you go, oh, is there anything you wanted to clear up?
No, I don't believe so. I believe all the questions that you've asked of me on the legal side I've answered. Legally the way I interpret it, but my interpretations are not just my interpretations. I've researched this, I've researched state statutes, I've researched other public safety sales tax measures, I've researched case law, to support the propositions that we've discussed about if we were to go against what the ordinance says in the future. So, I always say I'm not going to be in this seat forever, just like nobody's going to be in their seat forever, but I can tell you based upon my legal research what has been done in the past, not just my own opinion, that legally what I've told you guys is what the law is. So,
thank you, sir. I appreciate your professionalism. You found it.
I found it. So what was the time frame on that audit? Is that a yearly or
It's annual.
That's annual.
Yeah,
and that's what that my memory was annual, but I just couldn't remember if that was.
Yeah, I believe it's in June or July. And even the audit report, I'm not even present for the audit report to the council. It's like, it's
that's the big green book that.
Yeah. Yeah, but all the audited financials are online, so even at the present time, you can see. Yourself or the residents, anyone can see how they go through the audit, and they look at our accounts and they make sure that those things, how they review our financials. So that's somebody we contract with, but it's an independent auditor.
Mr. Cameron, are there any final thoughts that you think the council should consider?
No, my thought is that the request is to let the citizens decide if this is a priority for them, that this is a piece that is necessary for our public safety. But I just appreciate the opportunity to meet. That's the thing about it is I don't delve into the social media world. I try to do all of it out in the front and right out here where we can discuss it. And we're televising this. This is live right now. There's nothing that we're leaving. I hope that that's appreciated, because that's exactly what we're trying to do. We're not trying to navigate, and if there be any other way, like I said before, Mr. Mayor, is when you come into a new community, it's one thing to see the financial position. It's another thing to be crazy enough in a conservative environment that to ask for a 1-cent sales tax. Nobody wants to do that. And so it looks like the easy path, the path of least resistance, but we tried everything, refinanced our debt, cut costs, reduced positions, everything that I can think of that I know, even moved it out of the street fund. That's why I think this is something that I just appreciate the fact that it's on the table. I cannot tell you the weight that is off me in that perspective, that we're actually having open dialogue versus taking that home, talking to my wife, going, I'm not really sure how we navigate through this. I was devastated when the last measure failed. I knew what that impact meant. I knew that we're going to have continued scenarios where officers were responding with 3 people, and you couldn't even do an in-house rescue because 3 people are responding. I have that weight. So for us to be equally distributing that and talking about it, finding solutions, reduces my stress level immensely. I just look forward to the continued dialogue, and I look forward to educating the community if this council sees fit of putting it on the ballot. That's it. Thank you.
You know, it's always a struggle. Thank you, sir. It's always a struggle as I sit up here and I try to figure out what I should say and what I shouldn't say. And I hope you indulge me just for a couple of minutes. I've been relatively quiet today, so I'd like to say my piece. And this is going to sound strange at first, but please try to stick with me. I've got a very close family member that got prostate cancer. Yeah, I know. Stick with me. If we're male and we live long enough, we're all going to get prostate cancer, right? It's one of the most curable diseases there is. It's very, very straightforward. But my family member decided he didn't want to listen to the doctor. He didn't want to have the prostate removed. He didn't want to go through the treatment. He read a book. He read a book called The Plant Paradox. And he read this book, and I read it too because he gave it to me and I care about him and I want to learn. So I listened to him, and this plant paradox tells him that if you eat salads and you walk, your cancer will go away. Now, it's more complicated than that, but that's the shortened version. He didn't listen to the doctor. He didn't treat his prostate cancer. He ate salads, and he walked, and he lost a lot of weight, and he looked great. I mean, he looked awesome. He looked like 20 years younger. And then the cancer spread. And he got bladder cancer, and now he has stage 4 cancer. He looks amazing, and he's still eating his salads. And the reason I'm telling you all this is he's going to die, and he's going to die because of the decisions he made. And I respect him for those decisions because he's a grown man and he made the decisions himself. Why am I telling you all this? Well, because we're in the same situation. We've got a cancer, and we've got a doctor. We've got a doctor that we have picked. We review him. We decide whether or not he gets raises or not. We looked at him when he got brought on. Does he have the experience? Does he have the knowledge? Does he have the proper schooling to be able to come in here and give us answers? Now, if I got prostate cancer, I'm not going to the doctor and saying, where'd you go to school? Right? I'm not going to the doctor and say, I might ask, well, what recent articles have you read? Why do you feel like this is the best idea? You're the doctor. I'm going to listen to you. Now, I'm not telling you I'm going to listen to everything that Mr. Cameron says. He has some dumb ideas, too. Sure. And hearing the first laughter in the room today, I think most of us would agree with that. But here's the thing. The reason Mr. Franklin has a hard time coming up with other proposals is because they've done the work. The doctor's done the work. The doctor has dug in, has gotten the education, has done the experience. This isn't your first job.
No.
He has a staff that we trust, and they have done the work. Now, we can eat a salad. We could put it off. We absolutely could. And we might have to. The voters can vote this down. We are powerful in this room because of what we say and what we do on social media. People are going to listen to us. And the voters might vote it down. And then we'll be forced to eat salads and go on walks. The problem with that is we don't fix the problem. And what happens when you don't fix the problem is the cancer spreads. So what comes, and we could have a very long presentation from Chief Sells, what happens when crime goes up? What happens to business? What happens to home values? What happens to our community? Because this isn't just oh, if it doesn't pass, we'll deal with it. No, we have to deal with it. And if we don't listen to the people that we trust, we're supposed to get in these sessions, and we're supposed to ask these questions, and we're supposed to have good conversation. And we're supposed to push Mr. Cameron and staff. We're supposed to do that. That's our job. And we did that. Now we have to make a decision. Are we going to listen to this doctor? Or are we going to read a book and eat salads? Because my family member is going to die. Now, he might also get hit by a truck and die for another reason, and we might too. But we have a very simple solution that is painful. No one wants a tax. But if we say no new taxes no matter what, we're doing a disservice to this city. We've listened to the alternatives. We've thought about it hard. We've had years to think about it. We've had special meetings to think about it. I trust Mr. Cameron and his staff, and I'm going to support him in this. I'm going to vote yes to putting it on the ballot, and then I'm going to help educate the citizens, because this is who it affects. So I appreciate your time coming here today to have yet another doctor's appointment. But it's the right thing to do, and I appreciate your time. I'm going to close the work session. Have a good day.